The goal of analytical design is to make people smarter. A good start is to make our information displays worthy of the routine capabilities of the human eye-brain system. About 5 or 6 years ago, those capabilities have been measured in quite a direct way by assessing the information throughput of the optic nerve, which far exceeds AT&T's information throughput. The light comes in to the lens, is focused on the retina, and there the retina in effect is made from brain cells. Right there, seeing and thinking start to become one, and the results of that processing go via the optic nerve to the brain. The optic nerve carries 10 megabits per second, times 2, since there are 2 optic nerves. For most of us, it might be in 16-bit color. Those of you who are artists or designers probably see an 18-bit color. And it's all, of course, providing information about 3 space as well. And that's accompanied by a fairly powerful, still a very powerful editor, that's our brain, that edits, forgets, chooses, selects, summarizes, focuses, and all the other 400 or 500 verbs that the brain engages in. The optic nerve, the eye-brain system, has approximately 1,000 times the resolution of a standard PowerPoint slide. There's a long way to go to make our displays worthy of the routine capabilities of the human eye-brain system. Here's another way to put this. Can we make our screens and our presentations of information have the information throughput of the sports page? ESPN, their tables average 150 to 200 numbers and 30 nouns per table. The average number of numbers on a government slide is 12. So ESPN is having about 15 or 20 times the data resolution of the average government slide. Or can we go to a higher standard and bring our analytical displays up to the level of real science, up to the level of an article in the two rockstar journals in science, either Science or Nature or the Public Library of Science. There you will see in those journals the best visualizations in the world. Not at a visualization shop, not at a supercomputer center, but by practicing scientists who are publishing in the best scientific journals in the world. If you want to see great visualizations, go there. What you have are very smart people publishing in a leading journal. They have very substantial research resources. They have enormous amounts of data, and they have no space. When Watson and Crick published their report on the discovery of DNA, the journal Nature gave them a page and a half to report. And so you have these smart, ambitious, data-rich people who have no space, and they really pack their displays to show off all the information they've collected and they're finding. And they do in these displays whatever it takes. They mix up words and tables and graphics and pictures and sock puppets and everything, videos and everything they possibly can do. And so you're now not seeing visualization as a process, but as a method done by real content people to reveal their findings. And that's the place to look for, if you want to play in the big leagues, that's the place to look for models, is in the major scientific journals. In making public reports or technical reports to your colleagues, can you bring them up to the information throughput of Google News, the New York Times, or in scientific reporting up to the perspective sections of Science and Nature? The idea here is that your comparison set and your analysis comes not, heaven forbid, from focus groups, but by comparing it with the best, with the big leagues of people who make technical reports, who make reports to large numbers of people. And so your comparison set then would be, if you're making reports to a large number of people, well, go to places that do that engage 10 million users a month or more. The New York Times website, the Google News. That should be the metaphor. It shouldn't be software. It should be people who do, well, reporting. That's what they do. And they try to maintain the integrity of the content as it comes from the hardcore data people on through interpretations by including, for example, diverse sources, as they do in the news, all kinds of material. They have graphics. They use what are called sentences in their report, which accumulate into what are called paragraphs. That is the way we get design metaphors is by, and the way we find out what we can get away with in our displays is by looking at high resolution successes in the wild. And so we know what the New York Times can get away with in terms of intense content. We know what the sports section, what ESPN can get away with. We know what real scientists do. And those then are our metaphors. It should not be what people learn about interface design. About 10 years ago, and for a 10-year period before that, the fashion and interface design was driven by cognitive psychology, and they had one great big finding, which was a famous paper by George Miller called the magic number 7 plus or minus 2, which indicated that people in short-term memory had a hard time remembering more than 7 things at any one time, or at least they had a hard time repeating them back to a psychologist, repeating nonsense syllables back to a psychologist. That finding then got translated into interface design and indeed web design, that you should show only 7 things on a menu, or indeed sometimes only 7 things on a home page. And the task of the victim of your display, of the user, is not short-term memory. It's to find something they want to read about, they want to learn about. Here in the wild now, we have the New York Times homepage and Google News, which put up on their homepage 400 downlinks. That's illegal, probably, by every single book about interface design ever done. Instead, we rely on the enormous powers of the human eye brain system to look over a variety of materials and choose their name, the words they're looking for. We're very good at it. And looking over a large variety and choosing. And so you show off all the kinds of information that instantly when you arrive. And the New York Times does not begin its news with a 5-minute speech by the publisher of the Times, welcoming them to the Times. It begins with essentially access to 400 news stories immediately on the homepage. There's no fooling around. Or Google News. And we know it works simply by that they are successful in the wild. Neither of those were designed by doing user testing or focus groups or anything like that. We measure success. We measure our metaphors by comparisons with excellent displays, and we identify excellent displays by they serve our purpose and they have proven success in the wild. This is essentially Apple's strategy of design. Johnny Ive, who's done the industrial design and some interface design and all the things you've heard about in the last 10 years from Apple, was asked in an interview on the BBC a few years ago, can you tell us how you use focus groups at Apple? He said, we don't do focus groups. Steve Jobs was showing off the first iPad to the Washington Post and the New York Times and the reporters a week before it was announced. And they asked him, What kind of consumer research did you do in designing this magical device? He said, the job of the customer is not to design the stinking product. He probably didn't use the word stinking, however. He used another word. The job of the customer is not to design the product. That's what we do. Again, note that promotes a coherence and integrity of design. Focus groups is one of the things that provokes featureitis. We get all this list of things that people supposedly want. Featureitis has swamped more government projects than probably any other problem there is. Speaking of success in the wild, I must admit that I sometimes ego surf, at least on things I've invented. And about 2 months ago, I put the word Sparkline, which is we're about to hear about, which is a data graphic. I invented it 12 or 15 years ago into Google. And I must say it had more results than the phrase Steve Jobs, more results than the phrase spreadsheet, or more results than the phrase Andy Warhol. And as an amateur artist, I was proud that at least in some place I'd wiped out Andy Warhol. Ego surfing is success in the wild. Let's look at Sparklines as an example of trying to bring up our information displays up to the capacities of the human eye-brain system. And you have a handout. You can all get that out. That came with your package up at the front desk. There are two great big ideas here. The first one is that from now on, all of our data graphics will have the resolution of everyday ordinary typography, not the resolution of sticks and ticks with thick pencils drawing conventional charts. That idea gives you a 50-fold increase in the resolution of data graphics. The other big idea is that from now on, graphics and visualizations are no longer a special occasion. They can be anywhere a word or a number can be. They're not in a separate box. It doesn't say figure 17b underneath them. It doesn't have go see this on the other slide. They're simply just like a word or a number. They can be in a cell in a spreadsheet. They can be in the middle of a sentence. They can be anywhere a word or number can be. Here's an example on the second page, almost worthy of the sports section on page 2. I'm using the high-resolution display technology, the PAPER technology, the paper today. And let's look at the first display there. This is the exchange rate of the dollar against the euro. We see the opening number in this series, $1.10 and a quarter of a penny, 1.1025. So that's accurate to 5 significant digits. And then it shows the exchange rate in that little data line of the euro for every day for a year. Then it shows the most recent value to the right. And the scales, and then the blue dots and the blue numbers show the high and low. So I box in the spark line on all 4 sides, the beginning and the high and the low. Those numbers would be in the table anyway, in looking at a set of data. So we just put a spark line in. That spark line shows approximately 500 numbers. We have 250 trading days, so we have 250 levels, 249 changes, so about 500 numbers, all right there to the eye. Now, we can also see the most recent reading. Let's now small multiply that in the second table on page 2, and this shows the foreign exchange rate of the euro against the dollar, the yen, and the pound for every day for 5 years. Why fool around? You'll see in the tail of that some interesting change in the pound-euro exchange rate versus the other ones. If that's too much, then the figures for a year, every day for a year, are shown on the right. Now let's look at this table. It's almost as good as a sports table. Why? Let's see. It shows The traditional part of the table are the numbers. Those are the red and blue numbers. Those are 24 numbers. They're accurate to 5 significant digits. The Sparklines show 14,000 numbers, accurate to 2 significant digits. Since it has the resolution of a word, we know that by typography success in the wild, people can read a Sparkline. They can read a word, they can read a Sparkline. We can now see immense numbers of patterns. We can see immense amounts of data. One of the useful things about the Sparkline is it may break down the notorious recency bias. Human beings have a bias, clearly from evolutionary survival, that the most recent event that happens provokes a disproportionate response compared with previous events. And that was probably a good thing to have when the saber-toothed tiger was scratching at the door of the cave, but problems are often a little more subtle now than overweighting the most recent event in a decision calculus. Well, the Sparkline in this table shows both. It shows the most recent reading, but it also shows the last 5 years of readings. And so at a glance then you can say, here's the most recent reading, and for every day over the last 5 years we've seen this extreme, it looks like about 10 times. So immediately it's contextualized, immediately we're comparing the recent change with a vast amount of data at a glance. Reading a Sparkline is not quite reading a word because we're familiar with word shapes, but still the data shape then provides the basis of comparison. Let's see if we can measure up to the sports page. Here's the back page here, page 4. I should let you know that I live on the exact neutral contour line between New York and Boston with regard to baseball. Actually, I can put it this way. I live slightly north of that contour line. I may say something indicating I'm a New England baseball snob here. So let's look at the bottom display first. And we see in the middle the conventional display of teams and their performance overall at home, on the road, and under indictment. And then to the right of that, it shows every game for the entire season, the sequence. A whisker on the upside is a win, a whisker on the downside is a loss, and there's a causal variable in there. See the little line between the whiskers? Those are home games. The two big causes of wins and losses are talent, or in the Red Sox case, lack of pitching, and whether you're playing at home or away. So that shows the whole sequence that the players and the writers and many fans go to as the home away. But why are we interested in just how each team did over the season? It's a race. So that cluster of Sparklines over on the left, lower left of page 4, shows the standings and the distance between teams for every day, for every game, for the entire season, for 5 teams. And there's the race. When we look at this, that's the architecture of competition. When we look at it above, for the 6 divisions, we learn something substantive very quickly, which for some teams, it's all over by the 1st of June, Baltimore. For some divisions, it's all over by the 4th of July. That is, it's a runaway success. And the 1st of June, they're runaway. So those Sparklines show about 5,000 win-loss outcomes, all perfectly visible in a very in fact, interesting story. Well, if we wanted to study this historically, we would have this for 10 seasons. So that's 50,000 win-loss outcomes. This is not accompanied by a legend, by a manual about how to read it. It's not accompanied by any computer administrative debris. It's just pure data. This is a big idea in all my work, which is basically, and in my also interface design, which basically is trying to zero out the interface and have full data screens as much as possible. It's one of the things that we see, of course, in the iPhone, is that They dispose of administrative debris as quickly as possible, and many of your experiences on the iPhone are 100% content. The great breakthrough of the touchscreen is we've gotten the stinking scroll bars and the command structure off. It doesn't steal our content space anymore. The command structure resides in the hand of the user. And so just by that, we've gotten about a 40% content resolution upgrade by clearing out the administrative debris. I expect in 3 or 4 years we'll be like classical pianists on doing finger touches on touch screens. But that's been one of the great innovations, which is to get rid of the space hog administrative debris and put the administration, the commands, reside in the hands of the user. I've had quite a bit of experience in the government in Washington the last couple of years, and before that in some big companies. And I think that what I say here is true both of the government and many big companies. The average government website and technical presentation involves a Dell laptop screen showing a PowerPoint slide designed by focus groups to accommodate the disabled and the PR staff, which wants 3 logos on every slide and no more than 20 words per slide, and it has 42% computer administrative debris, 10 mysterious features, and uses proprietary formats that are proprietary even to themselves. What have you all gotten yourself into with that? The point of these displays is to make people smarter, for heaven's sakes. The comparison set, again, is if you're doing reporting, look at Google News. If you're doing technical reporting, look at the New York Times website. Look at a real scientific thing. Do not look at a PowerPoint slide or at a conventional interface. The goal of all my work has been to make people smarter. Make people smarter, at least analytically. Perhaps a bit more skeptical. Another goal is you can think of statistics is learning from experience, and it's I try to make people smarter and learn more from that experience. I have also conducted on the side, which is only about 5% of my work, the war against stupidity, either in statistical analysis or in displays. But the 90 or 95% of my work is on the positive side, trying to make people smarter. So the purpose of an information display is to assist reasoning and thinking about information and evidence. That's a very powerful idea. That is, it's entirely about the content and the intellectual acts that the user performs on that content. That is, it's all about the surface. It's all about the content and intellectual activities of the user. And that's where the trouble begins, with the word user. There are only 2 industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software houses. In Unix for a while, they called them losers. It gives you an idea of the friendly spirit of that language. Let's say what we care about are all the content and intellectual experiences of the person who's getting smarter. That's what we're doing. This idea, the follow-up to it is then that if we're concerned about analytical thinking and information displays should support analytical thinking, then and should be designed to analytical thinking, then our design principles are identical to the principles of analytical thinking. So one thing, every statistical problem, every data problem involves making comparisons. That's the intellectual act. Okay, then we have the design principle. Show comparisons. Serious analysis is always trying to understand causality or explain something. Okay, so that's now a design principle. This you take the analytical task and turn it into a design principle. Show causality, mechanism, explain something. I'll go through that in more detail. This idea has enormous implications. It says it's not about the software, it's not about pitching, it's not about the operating system, it's not about censoring and denial, it's not about monopoly legacies, it's not about confirming prior views, it's not about logos, it's not about administrative debris. It's about intellectual operations performed on content. And that's all it's about. That suggests a design process, which is outside-in design, that we design entirely and as much as we can from the surface. And so in a practical situation, it means getting our best analysts together, getting them the highest resolution screen they possibly have, and letting them kludge together what they want to see. And then, and only then, do we ask the world, is there some software that supports this? And the choices of everything is driven either by that hardware specification or by the content people. That's surface first. The joke about that's how they do it. They design the surface first. The joke about Apple is they actually design the package first. They're so elegant and so wonderful. But they design the surface first. Virtually everything in the government is done differently. Essentially, the government referees among software houses, each having an application solution, desperately looking for a problem to solve. The interface and the content are kind of byproducts of getting this generic software house to somehow work at what we want to do. It's got to be the whole thing to get the content right and the thinking right. That's what it's got to be driven by. And so the process is outside in design. It's always about the surface. The trillions of dollars invested in software, most of that is invested in producing something for the user to perform an intellectual act on the screen. That is the sole design parameter. That's what we're trying to go for entirely. That is where design starts and ends, is supporting the intellectual processes of the user. I'm astonished that the idea that content is important and the analytical thinking goes with it. I still dine out on that idea. People still find it remarkable after all these years. Of course, that should be the way things are done. It's not about process. It's not about the software. It's not about all the other stuff. It's about how you reason about content and how you make that quick and effective. Let's look at the design principles driven by intellectual tasks, and the example that I'll use to show those intellectual tasks and design principles is the lovely French invasion of Russia in 1812. If you can all get that in front of you, please. You have a poster. This is the story of the War of 1812, and this is War and Peace as told by a visual Tolstoy. Moscow is in the upper right-hand corner on this map. The Polish-Russian border is on the left. And you see the tan flow line moving, crossing into Russia over on the west, moving to the east, to our right, to Moscow. And the flow line shows the path taken by Napoleon's troops, and the width of that shows the number of surviving soldiers in this disaster. They began with 422,000 troops in the far west there. We follow the tan flow line in. Some flanking troops break off. 100,000 reach Moscow. The dark line is the path of retreat out of Moscow, moving to the west to our left. The catastrophe continues as the soldiers die. The line of retreat is briefly thickened as some flanking soldier troops rejoin the retreating army, but you'll see that half of them fell through the ice of the Berzina River and drowned. That's that discontinuity. And they arrived back where they started with 10,000 survivors. The beginning and the end over on the left provide a small but poignant example of the first grand principle of analytical thinking and therefore analytical design. When we look at data, the fundamental intellectual act is to make smart comparisons, to answer the question, compared with what? Well, there's a comparison. The size of the army when they started, the width of the town line, the number there, 422,000 troops. Afterwards, the width of the black line, 10,000 survivors, 1 soldier and 42 survived. Comparisons are very important for entities that deal in billions and trillions of dollars. I tried to get, unsuccessfully, to have people have some concept of what is now about $820 billion in stimulus spending. So here are some comparisons. You could buy every house in the country a new screen door. You could buy every resident of China the complete 36 CD set of Elvis Presley's recordings. The stimulus is 1/7 of Iraq and Afghanistan. That gets you. That's interesting. 1/7 of Iraq and Afghanistan. So comparisons help us judge these impossible qualities. They show befores and afters, and they're the fundamental act of thinking about numbers. This map also illustrates the second grand thinking task, and therefore design task, which is the reason we look at evidence very often is to understand causality, mechanism. Any kind of policy thinking is of necessity causality thinking. That is, to produce the desired effect, we need to know about and also be able to govern the cause. Any kind of intervention thinking is at its core causality thinking. Very important. Our displays should show causality, mechanism, explanation. They shouldn't just sit there kerplunk and just show us the bad news. I mean, the map here is descriptive. It just shows us the bad news, the location of the bad news. It doesn't say how the soldiers came to die. But Minard, the French engineer who designed this, did bring a causal variable in. He shows the temperatures during the retreat. And that's because Napoleon was defeated not only by the Russian army, but also by General Winter. It was bitterly cold, and many of the soldiers froze and starved. How cold? Well, that's what the temperature scale shows. And so that's how the possible causal variable was brought in. The third principle. We're trying to understand a multivariate, that is 3 or more dimensional world, a world that has a problem that has 3 or more factors. Every policy problem does. And we're trying to use flatland display surfaces to show a high-dimensional problem. And so the long history, ever since maps were first drawn, of analytical design has been to try to show more than 2 dimensions on 2-dimensional display surfaces. Minard got 6 dimensions of data down on this flatland. The principle is show more than 1 or, don't stay in flatland, show more than 1 or 2 dimensions. Well, Minard, because we seek to understand the high-dimensional world. Minard got 6 dimensions: the size of the army's location in latitude and longitude, that's 2 and 3, direction the army is going, the temperatures, and the dates attached to the temperatures. This does not come with an instruction manual to read either. There's no legend. There's no, there it is. No administrative debris. It's all content. This also illustrates a very important principle, which is when we are trying to understand causality or make comparisons or learn the truth or figure things out, our thought processes are utterly indifferent to the mode of production of the information. That is, when we're reasoning about causality, we're getting information from words and maps and tables and sock puppets and graphics and videos and whatever it takes. That is, our displays should do whatever it takes. That is, our displays should completely integrate all the different modes of information. Look what Minar did. We have up top a paragraph of words sitting on a map and a statistical graphic dangling from the map, and there are words and numbers all over it and scales of measurement and so on all over it. Utterly indifferent, so to speak, to the mode of production. All my work is indifferent to the mode of production. I don't care whether you're showing stuff on a piece of stone 6,000 years ago, a piece of paper, in a movie, on a computer screen. The cognitive tasks are forever. The intellectual tasks to be supported. This is a very important idea. Violation of this idea is the fundamental conceptual error of today's graphical user interface, which is it segregates information by the mode of production. We go to a special room to do a spreadsheet. We go to a different special room to write a text. We go to another special room to fudge a photograph or to edit a photograph. We go to another, and so on. Those are called apps. That's not the right way to do it. The original graphical user interface was designed at Xerox PARC, and the user on the desktop never saw anything called an operating system. Imagine that. Imagine if you could have lived for the last 30 years without knowing about Vista, without knowing about OS 6.03, etc. There's no reason a user should ever have any knowledge of an operating system. If you have an interest in operating systems, it's an unnatural interest. In addition, there were no apps in the original graphical user interface. It was a documents-based interface. So you're typing along and you want to show a picture. You click on what's called a property sheet and you place and edit the picture in the document itself. You don't go through a special room through a proprietary format, do something only on that, and then come back through a proprietary format. Or if you want a spreadsheet, you click on the spreadsheet, it puts it in the document itself. This maintains the natural and appropriate integration of all the modes of content. And yet enforced on the user is the segregation of different modes of content. That is contrary to thinking about making comparisons, causality. It's contrary to thinking. That has meant immense profits for software houses, but it's against the merits of the case and it's against the needs of the user. Grand principle, the next grand principle is the credibility principle. We, as consumers of presentations, we need to understand the presenter's story and decide whether we can believe them or not. We're trying to assess their credibility. Are they competent? Are they malicious? Are they conspiring against us? I'm a great believer in the idea that incompetence is a better explanation than conspiracy or malice. Okay, I think incompetence is underestimated and malice and conspiracy is overestimated in the world. And so consequently, as a presenter, you have two things to get across. One is your story, and secondly, whether they should believe you or not. A good way to be believed is not to have lied to your audience last month. That is, in other words, his reputation for credibility. Another is to say where your information comes from. Who's paying for this? Who is involved in this? Minar begins, the best data graphic, certainly the 19th century, and maybe some other centuries as well. He begins up at the top with 2 paragraphs that are essentially pure documentation, sourcing. He talks about the 5 data sources that he got the material from. He says who did the work. He says who printed it. He talks about a data difficulty. That's the lead, because there's several reasons maybe why. One, he was a great engineer. Engineers, unlike the rest of us, are bound by the laws of nature. I guess we are too, but they're bound by the facts matter to them. In engineering, you can't have your own facts, I guess is the way to put it. That you recall that Senator Moynihan once said something very interesting, is you're welcome to your own opinions, but you cannot have your own facts. And so Minar has the kind of factual quality of an engineer. The other reason, though, is he wants to establish that the data sources are independent of his own points of view, because what he is doing here, and the reason he made this, is this was made as an anti-war poster. Right from the start, it was meant as an anti-war poster. He hated war, he had experienced it in Europe, and he wanted to show the terrible costs of war. 400,000 in the French army dead. This leaves out the Russian army and the civilians there, and that takes it up to 1 million people, which was, it's a lot of people, period, but it was really a substantial part of the big population of the world at that time as well. And so he wants to establish, he doesn't want quibbles over the data, so to speak, to deflect his message. And so he establishes the sources are these. Here are their names. I didn't cook this data up. He's also established I'm sensitive to discrepancies in the data. So it establishes. You give people. You're trying to convince people. You know what you're talking about. And that leads the fact that it's an anti-war poster leads to that story. Leads to the most important thing of all. This brilliant display was done by somebody who had a great knowledge and a great passion about the content. It's an absolutely brilliant design, and it was driven, though, entirely by content. That's why he made it as an anti-war poster. That's why he made it. He had, of course he could draw and see and count. He had those skills, but what made this what it is and what made it so remarkable is it's a very powerful anti-war document. In a very small space. Completely accessible. No legend to figure out what it means. It's just all there and coherent. And so it illustrates these 6 fundamental ideas that are turned into design principles. So that's grand principle 6, which is it's all about the content and the intellectual acts that the thinker performs on the content. I have some conclusions, I want to talk about one more thing. These are threats to visualization. And the credibility. The first threat is, in a sense, the fact that you're doing it. I call this distancing. On the computer screen, you are looking at representations of real things, not real things. It is one of the secret truths of doing data analysis is you often never learn more about the data than when you go out in the field and see how the data were measured. For example, there's lots of measuring in rivers. Companies have to show they're not polluters, and they essentially dump a can, take a sample of water out, once a week or once a day or whatever. And there's a problem because they go out and kind of look into the water and decide where to take the sample. That's called sampling to please. Well, we just learned a lot about the whole policy situation there and how we monitor things, and maybe we need independent monitors, et cetera, by going out and seeing how the data were measured. You are also checking up on measurement, but you're going to learn a lot more things by being in the field, by doing the detective work. Distancing, so it's contrary to distancing. It's being there. One of the great grand truths in many things is just show up. And I think on the computer screen is not always showing up. Your distance. The second big threat is that we have one more excellent tool for cherry picking of evidence, for cherry picking of information. Cherry picking is probably the biggest single threat of all to any presentation. People have much more material they can possibly show you, so they have to sort it out. Well, what they're reporting the product of the evidence or the product of their evidence selection? You see that distinction? Is it the product of information, or is it grown out of just how they selected the information? Did they cherry pick the information? This is hard to identify, cherry pickers in presentations. It's the single biggest threat to learning the truth from material. Maybe the data sets you get have been cherry picked, have been chosen in advance. That would be an example of pre-editing, cherry picking. Or the report is made. Or that once you have an idea, then you look at all the rest of the data through those lenses and you can't see anything else. You make a case by. That's, again, a cherry picking. This is the single biggest threat to learning from any data display, from any evidence, is how the data are, which data are examined, and then what material is reported, how cases are built. As a consumer presentations, a very good sign that you're in the hand, there are a couple of signs that you're in the hands of a cherry picker. First, it's the report is too good to be true. Real evidence has always got issues, but that any skeptic would know about. If it seems too good to be true, maybe you're in the hands of a cherry picker. Another key way is they won't reveal their sources. They won't let you see the underlying data set. They won't give you a link to the underlying data set for fear that somebody might poke around in it and see that the presenter had chosen the material selectively. They have all kinds of excuses for not showing you the data set. It's proprietary. It's top secret. It violates HIPAA, health privacy. It's unpublished, and we may be able to publish something. We have to wait until something is published. And the real jerks, the meatheads, will make an awful joke, and they will say to you, if I were to tell you where I got this information, I'd have to kill you. And you say, you are a cherry picker. And so that's a way to... But this is an extremely important thing, that you're just not developing a tool that is used essentially to make stronger and stronger wrong, untruthful cases. And you've really got to think about that and how you can build into your tools, and also in your presentations, defenses against cherry picking, and also provide evidence to your audience that you're not a cherry picker. One good way is external review, external, unbiased, independent, saying this presentation's okay by an unbiased external observer. To conclude, many of the people in this audience, they do either real science or they do social science. Real science, I would chide my colleagues at Princeton and Yale who were real scientists. I said the social science stuff is really much more difficult, and they would look aghast, and I would say, because you all you know that every single thing that you see is a product of a universal law of nature that governs or describes the behavior of every single particle in the entire universe. You have a gold standard. You have it easy. On the other hand, human behavior, we often try to find causal links in order to stop them, to change them. So there aren't laws in some sense, or at least there may be some laws, but many things we're intervening to find, we're finding associations that exist empirically in order to stop it. Social science is very difficult. People have been doing it for a long time. You want to be careful about doing amateur social science as a part of a policy thing. Yes, we want evaluation, but your job, your fundamental thing is not doing visualization, not doing social science, but causing something appropriate to happen in the real world. I've always thought my colleagues were a little bit, in the academic world, would pre-specify, say, a method before the problem. And in fact, they would say they would have approach to methods. So they would write on topics like approaches to visualization for world peace. And mainly write about approaches or perhaps visualization and never quite get to the performance, the product of universal world peace, whatever that may be. There was a preoccupation somehow with approaching and process, at least in the academic world. I doubt if any of you in either the corporate or government world have a preoccupation with process. The second point is one of the best skills that you can develop in the face of the enormous amount of data is not a software tool, but rather cultivating in your own mind a sense of what is relevant. A sense of relevance. Being able to look over a complicated problem and identify factors where you can intervene on, factors where you can't, of what to do to maintain focus. I guess I've known one genuine mutation in my life. There are lots of smart people in universities. This person was smart differently. And I think one of his biggest skills was he could approach just about any problem and look over the scene, and within about a half an hour was making original contributions to that field, which had not been his field up to that moment. And I think it was he could identify leverage points, causal links. It must be a property of really good administrators, which have, corporate presidents. They must pay them so much for some reason. To be able to choose. It certainly is a property of Steve Jobs with the incredible intense focus on just a few products and not letting anything get away. Go. I wish I had a little set of recipes. Good newspaper editors probably have that. They have this glut of stuff coming in, and they have to sort by relevance and what they publish, and then the order in which they publish. And they must have a highly developed sense. It's a wonderful skill that we improve our thinking, not just our software, our ability to manage, to think about. So a sense of I first developed something of one in graduate school, and after about a few months, I discovered that 95% of the published literature was junk. What a relief. The trick was to find what was relevant, the 5 best percent, and celebrate it and learn from it. Why is this so good? What do they do there? That was immensely powerful. I think a sense of relevance is for people who have a somewhat longer time horizon. That would be an example of that. But that's all. I don't know any more about it. I wish I had a little recipe. You might recognize people who have that and see what they do. That they're able to scan a complex scene and make something of it, intervene, and perhaps have some consequences. The next final point is the threat of cherry-picked evidence, which is universal and applies to all methods. And here's the way to put that. Once you have a point of view, all history will back you up. Because you can rummage through now all of history, all of the data set, and make your case. It happens all the time. Once you have a point of view, all history will back you up. How do you protect yourself against that threat? Well, maybe you write down a list of all the problems with the analysis, or try to come up with contrary interpretations, or maybe you just got you went down the wrong road. But that is one of the great grand truths of all time. Once you have a point of view, the brain, now can economize. It doesn't have to figure things out. It just files things consistent with that support that point of view. Once you have a point of view, all history or all your web surfing will back you up. Finally, if your display isn't worth 1,000 words, the hell with it. Thank you very much. Thank you.